Red, the elusive mastermind, and his ruthless gang, the Scarlings, ruled Liverpool's streets with fear, fire and drugs. For years their violence went unchecked. Explosions in alleyways, armed robberies, and disappearances became part of everyday life. But one night, a meticulously planned police operation changed everything, bringing one of the city's most dangerous criminal networks to its knees. This is the story of the Scarlings, the rise, the terror, and the explosive downfall. Liverpool was a city of contrasts. Its bustling streets and historic docks told stories of trade, music, and football glory, but beneath the surface, a darker world thrived. In the shadows of brick-lined alleys and abandoned warehouses, a criminal network had taken root, growing quietly yet aggressively. At the heart of this network was a gang known locally as the Scarlings. To the outside world, they were just another group of young men causing trouble. To those who lived near their operations, they were a force of terror, unchallenged and unpredictable. The Scarlings had built their reputation through a combination of extreme violence and meticulous planning. They controlled entire neighborhoods, dictating who could sell what, where, and at what price. Rumors circulated about their willingness to eliminate anyone who opposed them. In Liverpool's underworld, discretion was survival, and the gang's reach seemed limitless. Drug deals, once simple exchanges, had become deadly transactions. Witnesses spoke of brazen shootings on street corners and explosions at seemingly random sites, leaving families terrified to step outside. Shops shuttered early, and residents avoided certain roads after dark, their movements dictated by the unseen presence of the gang. Despite the fear, the gang operated with remarkable precision. Every move was calculated. Couriers transported kilograms of cocaine and heroin through back alleys and abandoned warehouses. Lookouts monitored the streets for police activity, and hidden compartments concealed firearms and cash. Even the police, experienced and relentless, struggled to keep up. Intelligence gathered over months revealed encrypted messages, false identities, and coded communications that kept the gang several steps ahead. Liverpool had seen crime before, but nothing quite like this. Local law enforcement had tried to intervene, but every raid seemed to miss its mark. The gang was always one step ahead, adapting quickly to any attempt to disrupt their operations. They had eyes and ears everywhere. Even officers in the field were unsure who could be trusted. Some suspected informants, while others worried about corrupt contacts within institutions. The fear that Scarlings could strike at any time became part of daily life. Residents spoke of a creeping tension in the air, a sense that life could shift from normal to violent in an instant. The gang's leader, known only as Red, was a shadowy figure, rarely seen in public and impossible to track. Stories about him varied, but one detail remained consistent. He was both ruthless and cunning. Red had built the gang into a machine of control, ensuring loyalty through intimidation and rewards alike. He was never caught, never photographed, and never spoken about openly, yet his influence stretched across Liverpool's criminal landscape. Some believed he had connections to international drug networks, smuggling operations that extended far beyond the city's borders. For months the city watched as the Scarlings' power grew. Explosions in back streets became headlines, sudden disappearances stirred fear and rumors. The gang's audacity seemed limitless, yet their downfall had already begun in the background, quietly, with meticulous planning and unseen surveillance. The tension was palpable. Liverpool waited, holding its collective breath, unaware that the very streets that had protected the gang would soon become the stage for their dramatic takedown. It was a world hidden in plain sight. Shops continued to open in daylight, children played in parks, and everyday life continued. But the shadow of the Scarlings stretched over every corner, every alley, every warehouse. Residents whispered about who was next, about the inevitable clash that would come. And though no one knew exactly when it would happen, one thing was certain: the reign of the Scarlings, a reign built on fear, greed, and violence, was about to meet a force it could not anticipate. The calm before the storm had begun, and Liverpool was unknowingly standing at the edge of a dramatic confrontation that would shake the city to its core. The Scarlings' influence was far greater than anyone had imagined. What had once appeared to be a gang of street-level dealers was actually a highly organized criminal enterprise. Police investigations began to reveal the intricate web of roles, rules, and connections that kept the gang not just alive, but thriving. The gang functioned like a small army, with lieutenants overseeing territories, drivers transporting drugs and weapons, and enforcers tasked with maintaining loyalty through intimidation. Even those on the fringes of the operation played essential roles, whether hiding stash locations, passing messages, or watching for police activity. Every member understood that failure meant punishment, and for many, the consequences were deadly. Liverpool's law enforcement faced a daunting challenge. The Scarlings weren't just violent, they were smart. They had studied the police, anticipating patrol routes, checkpoints, and even digital surveillance. Encrypted phones and secret messaging apps allowed them to coordinate deals with near-perfect security. Police discovered hidden safes, fake walls and tunnels beneath warehouses where drugs and cash could be stored without detection. The gang's logistical sophistication was astonishing. They weren't improvising. Every shipment, every transaction, and every confrontation was premeditated. The scale of their operations went beyond the streets of Liverpool. Intelligence suggested connections stretching across the country and even into Europe. Some gang members were responsible for negotiating deals with other criminal networks, while others managed the financial side, laundering money through legitimate businesses like pubs, nightclubs, and car dealerships. The deeper investigators dug, the more they realized that the Scarlings were not merely a local nuisance, they were part of an international criminal ecosystem. Red, the elusive leader, remained a mystery. He rarely appeared in person, relying on lieutenants to communicate his orders, yet his influence was unmistakable. Even the most hardened gang members spoke of him with a mix of fear and respect. He was strategic, calculating every move with an eye toward expansion. Some suspected he had ambitions far beyond Liverpool, dreaming of controlling routes for cocaine and heroin across the UK. Law enforcement believed that if Red remained unchecked, his operations could eventually rival some of the most notorious gangs in Europe. Amid this shadowy empire, the streets of Liverpool continued to suffer. Ordinary residents were trapped between fear and helplessness. Small businesses paid protection money to avoid arson or violence. Families stayed indoors after dark, and community spaces became ghost towns. Police patrols increased, but the Scarlings always adapted. When one route was compromised, another opened. When one safe house was discovered, another concealed space took its place. The gang's resilience was frustratingly effective, and frustration began to mount among those tasked with stopping them. Yet, cracks were beginning to form. Investigators uncovered patterns in the gang's operations. Repeated mistakes, however small, left traces. Surveillance footage, intercepted communications, and anonymous tips started to form a clearer picture of the gang's inner workings. Officers began to map out every member, every territory, and every possible weak point. Each discovery added pressure to an already tense environment. Slowly, a plan was taking shape. Not a simple raid, but a full-scale operation designed to dismantle the Scarlings from the inside out. The deeper the investigation went, the more apparent it became that the Scarlings had underestimated the city they had terrorized for years. Liverpool was not just a collection of streets and warehouses, it was a community of people unwilling to surrender entirely to fear. The gang may have controlled the shadows, but better revelation, every secret uncovered, was one step closer to bringing them into the light. Behind closed doors, police prepared for a confrontation that would demand precision, courage, and relentless determination. The city waited, still largely unaware, as the web of crime that had seemed untouchable began to unravel. In a world where secrecy was strength and violence was currency, the Scarlings had thought themselves invincible. But for every empire built on fear, there is a breaking point, and the moment of reckoning was drawing nearer with every passing day. Liverpool's underworld was about to face an enemy it could not outsmart, and the careful, calculated life of the gang was about to collide with a force that had been watching, waiting, and preparing for the perfect moment to strike. Months of preparation had led to this moment. The police had meticulously planned a sting operation designed to bring the Scarlings down once and for all. It wasn't a simple raid, it was a full-scale, coordinated strike involving dozens of officers, surveillance teams, and undercover operatives. Every detail had been mapped out, every escape route monitored, every warehouse, apartment, and hideout identified. The city itself became a chessboard, and the police were playing a dangerous game of strategy and patience. At the center of the plan was a young undercover officer who had spent weeks infiltrating the gang. He had gained the trust of mid-level members, learning names, habits, and routines. He had witnessed the gang's brutality firsthand, from beatings to intimidation tactics, and recorded evidence that would later prove crucial. His role was risky, and every moment spent inside the gang put him in mortal danger. But his bravery gave investigators. It was a moment that would become a defining point in the city's battle against organized crime, a turning point that signaled the beginning of the end for the Scarlings. Despite the adrenaline, the operation remained controlled. Every officer knew their role, every exit was covered, every piece of evidence was catalogued. The gang had thought they could outsmart the city, but the months of preparation, the careful mapping of their routines, and the courage of those willing to risk everything had tipped the scales. By the time the night ended, dozens of gang members were in custody, their empire shaken to its core. As dawn broke over Liverpool, the city slowly returned to its rhythm, unaware of just how close it had come to disaster. Behind the headlines and police statements, the reality was clear. A criminal network that had operated with near impunity for years had been dismantled in hours. The operation was more than a victory, it was a statement. The streets that had long been ruled by fear were now under the watchful eye of law enforcement, and the message was unmistakable. The Scarlings' reign, built on secrecy and violence, had been cracked open, exposing them to justice. Yet the story was far from over. While the initial strike had captured key members and seized massive amounts of drugs and weapons, the investigation was only beginning. Hidden layers of the gang's operations were still being uncovered, and the full extent of their crimes would soon shock the city even further. The sting had been successful, but it had also opened a door into the dark, intricate world that the Scarlings had built, and what lay behind that door was more dangerous, more shocking, and more complex than anyone could have anticipated. As the dust settled from the dramatic police takedown, investigators began the painstaking process of piecing together the full extent of the Scarlings' crimes. What they found went far beyond street-level drug dealing and local intimidation. Hidden ledgers, encrypted messages, and carefully concealed files revealed a network of criminal activity that spanned decades. Names appeared in connection with unsolved murders, armed robberies, and even violent assaults that had left the city reeling. It became clear that the Scarlings had not only terrorized neighborhoods, they had rewritten the rules of Liverpool's underworld. Some discoveries shocked even the most seasoned officers. In a warehouse tucked behind an unassuming row of houses, police uncovered a hidden room, fortified and soundproofed. Inside, firearms of every caliber were neatly arranged on racks, alongside homemade explosives and ammunition. Blueprints suggested the gang had been planning attacks, possibly targeting rivals or even law enforcement itself. The sophistication of the weapons and the potential for mass violence was alarming. For years the gang had seemed reckless, but in reality, every step had been calculated, every risk weighed. They had been living on the edge of catastrophe, and almost nobody had noticed. Financial investigations revealed another layer of deception. Businesses that appeared legitimate, car dealerships, nightclubs, and pubs, were in fact fronts for money laundering operations. Cash flowed in from the streets, only to emerge clean through the gang's network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Investigators found records of transactions with other criminal organizations, not only across the UK, but also in mainland Europe. It became clear that the Scarlings had ambitions far beyond Liverpool, Plans for expansion into international drug routes hinted at a network that could have rivaled some of Europe's most notorious criminal syndicates. The city had narrowly avoided becoming a hub for a continental drug empire. Perhaps most disturbing were the personal records the gang had kept. In addition to financial documents, the ledgers contained notes about intimidation tactics, bribes to officials, and threats against those who had resisted them. The scale of their manipulation was staggering. Police began piecing together stories of local residents and business owners who had been coerced into silence, forced to pay for protection, or threatened with extreme violence. The gang had operated in the open, yet no one dared defy them. Now all of their secrets were exposed. Even Red, the gang's elusive leader, was no longer untouchable. Evidence gathered from undercover operatives and seized communications linked him directly to many of the most serious crimes. The portrait that emerged was chilling, a man who had orchestrated a web of fear, greed, and violence from the shadows, confident that his identity and actions would remain hidden forever. But as the investigation deepened, it became evident that the gang had underestimated the persistence and reach of law enforcement. Years of careful planning could not withstand the combined pressure of intelligence gathering, surveillance, and modern policing technique. Every revelation added weight to the city's understanding of the gang's true danger. Liverpool, long familiar with crime, was forced to confront a reality far grimmer than anyone had imagined. The streets that had once seemed alive with energy now carried an invisible scar. Families had unknowingly lived in proximity to a criminal empire capable of extreme violence. Shops, schools, and public spaces had existed under a silent threat that only now became visible. By the time the court proceedings began, the scale of the Scarlings operation was undeniable. The evidence collected was overwhelming. Drugs, weapons, cash, records, and first-hand testimony painted a vivid picture of decades-long criminal domination. What had started as a local gang in Liverpool had evolved into a fully fledged criminal network, a machine of intimidation and exploitation. The city had been spared disaster, but the scars remained, etched into the memories of those who had lived through the reign of the Scarlings. The stage was set for justice. The web of secrets that had made the gang nearly untouchable was finally unraveling, and Liverpool was on the brink of witnessing one of the most significant legal victories in its modern history. The shock of what had been uncovered sent ripples through the community, a reminder of how deeply organized crime could hide in plain sight and how thoroughly it could be dismantled with patience, strategy, and courage. The courtroom was tense the day the trial of the Scarlings began. Months of investigation, raids, and undercover work had culminated in a legal battle that would determine the fate of a gang that had terrorized Liverpool for years. The evidence was overwhelming. Police reports, surveillance footage, seized weapons, drug caches, and ledgers detailing every aspect of the gang's operation painted a picture of organized crime on a massive scale. For the public it was almost surreal. Years of fear and violence boiled down into one monumental trial. The ringleaders faced a stacked case. Red, the elusive leader, was at the center. He had orchestrated nearly every major operation, from street-level drug deals to international smuggling plans. His reputation for cunning and brutality had kept him untouchable for years, but in the courtroom, his power diminished in the face of evidence. Each piece of testimony, each recorded message, chipped away at the empire he had built. Officers explained how they had dismantled the gang from the inside, using intelligence gathered by undercover operatives and meticulous surveillance. Every document, every photograph, every ledger of illicit transactions became a weapon against him. As the prosecution presented its case, the sheer scale of the crimes became undeniable. Hundreds of kilos of cocaine and heroin had been seized, alongside firearms, explosives, and large sums of cash. Hidden plans revealed the gang's ambitions to expand into Europe, showing that their reach extended far beyond Liverpool. The evidence painted a chilling picture of how deep fear had penetrated neighborhoods, forcing residents into silence and compliance. Each revelation brought gasps from the public gallery and headlines that would shock the city for weeks. The sentencing was historic. Judges took into account not only the drugs and weapons involved, but also the gang's systematic intimidation, violence, and influence over the community. Red received the longest sentence, a reflection of his role as the mastermind behind years of crime. His lieutenants and key enforcers also faced decades behind bars, with the combined sentences of the gang exceeding 100 years. The scale of the punishment reflected the scale of the crimes. A criminal network dismantled, a city finally gaining a measure of safety, and justice served in a way Liverpool had never seen before. For the residents, the verdict brought a profound sense of relief. Streets that had been shrouded in fear for years slowly regained their rhythm. Shops reopened, families returned to parks, and neighborhoods began to breathe again. Yet even as the city celebrated, the memory of the Scarlings lingered. The violence, the intimidation, and the audacity of the gang left an indelible mark. Liverpool had survived, but the scars of their reign would remain visible in the stories of those who had lived through it. The case also became a landmark in law enforcement. The meticulous planning, use of undercover operations, and coordination between units demonstrated the effectiveness of modern policing against organized crime. Officers and investigators who risked their lives celebrated the victory, knowing that the months of preparation, surveillance, and intelligence work had made a lasting impact. The operation was studied by other forces as an example of how to dismantle a deeply entrenched criminal network, proving that even the most dangerous gangs could be brought to justice. Red and his remaining lieutenants would spend the rest of their lives behind bars, their empire reduced to memories, documents, and headlines. Liverpool, meanwhile, began the slow process of healing. Community groups and law enforcement worked together to restore trust, reclaim public spaces, and ensure that such fear could never dominate the city again. The story of the Scarlings became a cautionary tale, a vivid reminder of the consequences of organized crime, but also of the power of perseverance, courage, and justice. In the end, Liverpool had faced one of its darkest chapters, and emerged victorious. The Scarlings' reign of terror was over, their secrets exposed, and their freedom revoked. The city moved forward, scarred but resilient, and the streets that had once trembled under the shadow of fear were finally free. The story of the Scarlings would be remembered not just for the crimes committed, but for the relentless pursuit of justice that brought one of Liverpool's most dangerous criminal networks to its knees.